Hello, everyone. We're just about to start. I want to thank you all for joining the Darien Library this evening. We have three terrific authors who are sharing their time with us. Before we begin, and before I give a little intro, I want to thank the friends of the Darien Library who make these programs possible. We'd also like to thank our partners at Barrett Bookstore who have all these books on their shelves. So you can go to their website tonight, or you can go to the store tomorrow and pick up all of them, some of them, any of them, but they're all great reads. And we'll also be taking questions at the end. Just type them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them. So let me start off with Alexandra Andrews. We have two debut authors and one seasoned writer. Alexandra Andrews has worked as a journalist, editor, and copywriter in New York and Paris. Who is Maud Dixon is her first novel. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and children, and there are rumors that this has already been optioned for a film. Ashley Audrain previously worked as a publicity director for Penguin Books Canada. Prior to Penguin, she worked in public relations. She lives in Toronto with her partner, and children, and The Push is her first novel, another great book. Wendy Walker is the best-selling author of All Is Not Forgotten, Emma in the Night Before, Don't Look for Me, and Hold Your Breath, with rights sold in 23 foreign countries. She is also optioned for film and television, and prior to writing, she worked as a family lawyer and an investment banker. She is currently working on her next thriller in Connecticut. With this, I will welcome you all, and please, Wendy's going to head the moderation, and we'll be back with some questions shortly. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. I just want to say this is such a thrill because I have not met these wonderful authors before, and I was just encouraging them to come and meet all the other thriller writers that have adored their books. They have been the buzz of the community with these amazing novels. And so I want to just start out by asking both of them to give a description of their wonderful books for those of you who are not familiar with them, because they are seasoned at describing them without spoilers, which is a real gift to be able to accomplish that. So do you want to start, Alexandra, and tell us about who is Maud Dixon?
I've actually been told that my synopsis has too many spoilers in it, but I'm sticking with it. I'm sorry. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here. Who is Maud Dixon is about a young woman, a young assistant who dreams of becoming a famous writer. She gets a job as the assistant to a world famous but pseudonymous writer, a la Elena Ferrante. And she ultimately decides to take a shortcut and steal her life.
Awesome! Not too many spoilers there. That was good. It's such a fun read and a compelling read. Really, so enjoyable. And Ashley, do you want to tell us about The Push?
Yeah, sure. So thank you as well for doing this and for having me. It's great. The Push is about a woman named Blythe Connor who comes from a history of women who have struggled greatly with motherhood, her own mother and grandmother in particular. And she's very determined that she's going to have a different experience and she's going to break that cycle and be, the kind of warm, present, engaged mother she always hoped she would have. And so she and her partner have a baby named Violet. But it is not long until she starts to believe there is something wrong with Violet. She is a very aloof, sort of unattached, very angry little girl, and she soon begins to act maliciously towards other children at preschool. And the problem is her husband, cannot see in their daughter what Blythe sees, and he thinks this is very much a result of the maternal anxiety, that Blythe has carried for so long. And so they move on and they have another baby. And in that second child, Blythe does find that connection she's looking for until something in the family, goes terribly wrong. And they're really forced to take a look at who their daughter is, who Blythe herself is, what has happened, and the family unravels from there.
Awesome. So what's amazing about these books, I've obviously read both of them, is that they have so much in common in that they They are deep dives into psychology. They have amazing female characters. They are literary, they're well written, they're page turning, but yet they are completely different in tone, and there's sort of a playfulness to who is Maud Dixon and a more seriousness to the push. So similar and so different. And I want to ask each of you where the idea came from, because there's such different concepts, and you're obviously both very talented writers that you executed beautifully. But where did these ideas come from? Do you want to start, Ashley?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I was always really interested in the idea of motherhood, like sort of obsessed with what motherhood was, like long before I was ready to have children myself. And not from a sense of, I wanted to be a mother or ever think I would be a mother, because I think for most of, definitely my 20s, I didn't think I wanted to do that, but more from a curiosity of like, why do women do it? Like, why do women have children, and how does it change their identity, and how does it change their life? And I was always really surrounded by, these picture perfect examples of mothers, like my own mom and, aunts and friends and that sort of thing. But I always knew, like, even I remember, like, as a young woman, like a child almost, like knowing that that was not always the case. And women had to regret this decision. And this had to go horribly wrong for some people, and what did that look like? So that had always been something that's on my mind for a while. So I think looking back, it's not, hard to see for me, like where, this darker story of motherhood came from. But then when I became a mother myself, I really experienced firsthand, that complete difference, between how society teaches you should feel about motherhood and the things you should say about it and what that experience should look like versus what it really can be like. And so that I really wanted to write through that in fiction. I wanted to write about a woman, who had a darker, unexpected experience with motherhood and where that would take her and what that family would look like. And so it's a bit of a, culmination of sort of all of those fears and anxieties about motherhood, I think.
It's amazing because it is a deep dive into the themes of motherhood and attachment, and we're going to get to more of that when we geek out on character development in a minute. But Alexandra, do you want to share with us where this idea came from? And because it's so unique and clever, and I'm just so curious, like where if it started with a character or with a plot idea.
It's interesting what you were saying about motherhood, because I actually decided to try to write a novel when I was pregnant with my first child. And I had never had any desire to write fiction before. I'd always wanted to be a nonfiction writer, but I had always wanted to be a writer. And there was something about the prospect of becoming a mother and having this person look up to me that made me realize I really just needed to do this. I couldn't keep putting it off. I really wanted my daughter to be proud of me. I didn't want her to see me in a career that I wasn't happy in. So that really was the spur to start writing. But and I actually started writing about a frustrated writer like myself, although the character of Florence ends up being very, very different than I am. And I think the idea was first sparked. I was rereading The Talented Mr. Ripley, which is a book I just love. And I really love all these mid-century, like sort of thriller writers, like Highsmith, like Graham Greene, Eric Ambler. I mean, Graham Greene is not exactly a thriller writer, but and I wanted to write something that had that same sort of tone of irony and fun and stylishness. And it was also at the height of sort of Elena Ferrante fever, when everyone was trying to figure out who she was. Everyone was reading the books. I mean, you'd be on the subway and like 6 out of 40 people would be reading these books. And I was very interested in this impulse to track down her true identity when she obviously wanted it to be kept secret. So I'd say it was sort of those actually 2 literary events that sort of sparked my book, which is, has a big literary theme as well.
So you touched on this question of how you both decided to write in fiction, because you both have backgrounds in media and in publishing or media or writing in this field. And so, Alexandra, you touched on this this notion of wanting to write fiction, but was this your first foray? What was it that you had wanted to write before? Have you always loved fiction? Like what makes you sort of just get up one day and say, I'm going to write fiction, and then look for a story?
Yeah, I wanted to be Joan Didion, the essayist, as a lot of young literary, 20-somethings do. And I just had come to the point where I realized I wasn't talented enough, and I didn't have an interesting enough life, and I hated all the nonfiction I wrote. I've always read a ton of fiction. I've been a huge, huge reader my whole life. And I actually married a novelist, and somehow just in my mind, novelists had always seemed so just up on a mountain somewhere far away. It just didn't seem like a real possibility. And then I met this, real person with all his foibles, and I realized, oh, normal people do this. And that sort of, I just decided to give it a try and see where it went. And I also very consciously decided to write a thriller because I wanted a very strong plot structure I thought it would keep me moving forward. When it just seemed like when you wrote fiction, it would be so easy to just get lost. And what happens next? There's no, reality isn't telling you. So I really wanted a very strong scaffolding.
Yeah, I love that. So basically your husband being just an average guy.
Now he's watching this. He's probably, he's a very impressive, wonderful man.
You can do it. I guess I can do it. I love that.
This jerk.
And Ashley, so what you were surrounded by books. What made you, did you just read so many books that you thought, I love books so much and I could do that? Or what made you want to do this, make this transition? And was this your first, sort of effort in writing on your own, for yourself rather?
Yeah, I had always loved writing. Similar to Alexandra, I always was writing something, not always fiction, but always something. And I was always taking writing courses at the community college at night after my job, and it always was a part of my life. And I think if you had have asked me when I was a little girl, what do you want to be when you grow up, I for sure would have said write books or be a novelist. And so, but I started working in public relations agencies, doing PR for consumer brands and all sorts of other stuff. And I did that for about 8 years or so before I moved over to work in publishing. And then I sort of did that same kind of thing. I did publicity and marketing at Penguin Canada for a couple of years. And the reason I made that move was because I don't think, similar to Alexandra, I didn't think I could really be a novelist. I didn't really think that was I didn't grow up in that world or in any sort of, any creative role models. That didn't seem possible to me. But when I made the move over to work in publishing, it really was because that was just what I loved, and I wanted to be around books and around writers, and sort of dreamed about that, but again, just didn't really feel like that was a real possibility. But working in publishing was its own education for sure. You are reading so much and you are learning so much, even when you don't know you are. You're reading differently too. You are reading from a publisher's perspective, and so yeah, I really learned a lot in those couple years. And I could say exactly the same thing that Alexandra said about becoming a mother. That really is the reason that I started writing this book. Hands down. I started writing when my son was 6 months old. And it was exactly that. It was, there's something about becoming a mother, for me, and I think for a lot of women, that it really makes you, really just strip down to who really am I? Who am I? How do I want to show up in the world every day? What is important to me? And I remember, it's exactly what you said, Alexandra. I remember looking at my son and thinking, oh my God, you're a mother now. Who do you want to be for this child? Who do you want this child to look up to and think this is what my mom did with her life? And I couldn't imagine being in a world where I had to look at my kids and say, well, I really wanted to do this. This is my dream. And I never did it. I just couldn't, that didn't feel right to me. And so I just thought it's now, now is the time I need to pursue this. And I also at that time, motherhood was very inspiring for me in a way, in terms of story and in terms of what to write about. And the story felt very urgent in me around that time. And I finally felt like, whoa, I have something to write about. I have a story to tell, and this was the story. And so for me, like being a writer and motherhood are totally intertwined that way. You know, I couldn't have written this book if I didn't experience motherhood, and that has its own challenges, you know, because being a mother also makes writing very difficult, you know,
Oh,
too.
no,
So
yeah.
it's sort of
Very
that
ironic that the time, right? You
ironic.
had all this time before this, like, you know, you
Totally.
worked your job, and then do you ever wonder what you did before you had kids with all this free time? And anyway, that's a whole other topic. But I also started writing after I had my first child, but for a little bit of a different reason. I wanted a career where I could be present for my children and still be working. And I was an attorney at the time, and it was not possible. But it's fascinating that like both of you had the same experience, and that's what prompted you to dive into this career. So let's now dive into characters, because I absolutely love all of the characters in both of your books. And I'm a huge psychology like buff, and I love doing research on it for my own books, and I dealt with it a lot as a family law attorney. There's so much psychology in both of your books and in all the characters. So I want to, Alexandra, I want to talk a little bit about Florence. So you sort of read The Talented Mr. Ripley, and that was an inspiration. And you can see that strain, because for anyone who's watching who hasn't read that, that really is a masterclass in a sociopath. It's written, I think, in close third person, right? So you're really in the head of this character, and he is very sociopathic. I mean, the thoughts he has and the way he experiences the world is like out of a textbook of a sociopathic mind. Florence is not to that extent, but where is that where she came from? Like because she progresses, right, to some interesting decision making throughout the book. How did you mold her?
I mean, both of these characters, it's about basically two women, Florence, the assistant, and the writer she's working for, who goes by Maud Dixon as her pen name, but her real name is Helen Wilcox. So both of these women were sort of modeled after people, I mean, not any one person, but people I knew and my own experiences. And then I just took them to extremes because it's way more fun. So, with Florence, there was, I also was like a wannabe writer. I was frustrated with where I was in the world. When I wrote this book, I was, into my mid 30s, and Florence is in her early 20s, but I remembered so well what it was like to be that age when you're in a new career, you're so nervous, or at least I felt over my head and intimidated all the time. I was so anxious. I mean, it's such a relief to be in my 30s now, I have to say. And so I just sort of took her to extremes, and I wanted in the first half of the book I wanted the reader to think Florence was just like a little off, like a little weird. There were just flashes where you're like, oh, I don't think I would do that. And then you're not sure which way it's going to go. And then, of course, she's pushed in the most extreme direction she can go. And then with Helen is very, for those of you who haven't read the novel, she's very cold. She's very arrogant. She's unapologetic. She's sort of ruthless. And I actually, in a way, she was modeled after a lot of women I admired, women who were just, I mean, for lack of a better word, were sort of like badasses, and were very ambitious and didn't worry so much about always being polite, which I think can be, can hold a lot of women back. I mean, you can be polite and successful at the same time. Let me not be too reductive. And then again, I just took it to extremes where it sort of curdles into like, I mean, I'll just say it, she's a terrible person. She's there's no gray area there. And I think I wasn't sure going in exactly what these characters were going to end up being, but I just sort of went with the policy of like, whenever I had the most fun writing, like stick with that. So if I just felt like I was like trudging along, I would think, okay, that doesn't work. If I'm not having fun, the reader doesn't want to read this. And so just by that sort of rule of thumb, I ended up with these sort of two sort of nutty, over the top characters because I really wanted this book to feel fun and entertaining, and I had a lot of fun writing it.
Well, it was a lot of fun, and it's so interesting that you say that about them, because it's almost like a little cat and mouse game between a seasoned, you know, sort of manipulator and this young woman who is just finding out how diabolical and devious she can be. It's like she almost doesn't know, and she surprises us, and you wonder if she's actually surprising herself as she goes along. And it is interesting, the juxtaposition, right, of those two very different paradigms, but equally diabolical and just so delicious to follow through the story. I mean, it really truly is fun. You achieved all of that. I'm just going to ask quickly if you had one that was your favorite.
Yes, I love Maud. I love Helen. I can't get enough of her. You know, she originally played a much smaller role in the plot, but I had to keep throwing her in.
So
she's sort of like, you know, when you like put your conscience aside and you just like let rip, everything you don't ever say in real life you can put on the page, which was a lot of fun.
And you can really feel that when you're reading it, because you can just feel it, the fun that you were having and that we get to have as readers. So I absolutely amazing characters. Okay, so Ashley, totally different vibe with these characters, but you have, is it four generations of mothers and daughters? I want to first ask you which one you started with. Did you start with Violet and say, what if you had a child you couldn't attach to? Did you start with Blythe? What if you were a mother who couldn't feel anything for her child? Did you start with one of the earlier generations? Which character was the sort of first first one to appear for you?
So for me, it was really Blythe. I mean, she really was the character that came to me really quickly, and her voice came to me very like distinctly and quickly, easily. It really started as a story about, you know, centered on Blythe, but also I think tightly within the context of her marriage. You know, her marriage. Her husband's name's Fox, and it really was always to me a story, you know, almost as much about a marriage and kind of what parenthood does to a marriage as it was, you know, just about motherhood and Blythe. And so it really was about her and her daughter, Violet. And for a long time, you know, there was no other generation sort of brought into it, but I always knew that she carried this, you know, maternal anxiety from her past. But I wasn't always going to go there in a more significant way. But as I was writing more about Blythe and kind of getting to know her, and as the story was evolving, I realized I couldn't really understand, you know, who she was and the way that I wanted to understand her, the way I wanted to write about her, if I didn't understand who her mother was. And so her mother, Cecilia's character, was born, and so I was, you know, going to make her, you know, more of this character and show these kind of flashbacks to her history, which I started to do. And then I sort of felt the same way again about her and thought, I really can't understand Cecilia unless I understand again, like, what was her attachment like as a child? How was she treated as a little girl? Like, what was her maternal example like? And then it did start to become more of this chain reaction kind of story to me, in terms of looking at these, you know, maternal histories and seeing what were these women carrying forward, and what were they trying to change, and what were they not able to change, you know, and how much of motherhood is learned and how much of it is in us, you know, is like innate, like the instinct part of it. And that, I was just very interested in that question, and the best way to explore that was just by going, you know, showing us these flashbacks to these other generations, and kind of weaving that through the story. Yeah, so it was not really intended to be this multi-generational story. It sort of just went there and worked out that way.
And it turns into that, and it's so, what's so fascinating, and I don't know if this was part of your intention or your research, but it really made me think about the whole nature versus nurture debate about, and I use this term very loosely, but sort of sociopathic behavior, in that the person is not able to have empathy and attach it's not just that they're bad mothers, but there is something innately selfish and just off about these women, and there are circumstances built into the backstory for at least the first two generations that make you very sympathetic towards them and understand where that it might have come from. And now you have Blythe, who had sort of a neighbor who was sort of intervening, and you can see that she had some parenting from this lovely neighbor, and now she has this daughter that she's trying very hard to mother, but who has these signs of sort of early onset sociopathic behavior. And was that part of your, did that evolve as well, of whether you were writing a book about nature versus nurture with these attachment disorders and behaviors?
Yeah, it really did evolve in a sense. Well, in a sense, I think in terms of the nature versus nurture, I mean, that's something that's, I mean, it's like an age-old thing that we've, talked about forever. And I think there is no real answer to that in a lot of ways, right? Like, we don't really know exactly what components of us are from nature or from nurture. Like, we have our guesses and we all have our different experiences based on our histories. But I think that's what's so fascinating to me about that whole discussion. And in fact, what's probably the most fascinating thing to me about having children is that, and this is kind of where the character of Violet came from, and that relationship that you've put so nicely, is that we all go into parenthood assuming that we are going to have a certain kind of child. We all go in assuming that we are going to create a human who is good and who is not capable of evil, and who we are going to love. And not only are we going to love them, but we assume we're going to like them. We assume they are going to be people we like and connect with. And the reality is that we don't know that at all. We tell ourselves that because we sort of have to, but we don't actually know. And I find that really fascinating. I think that as a society, we really like to think that we have more control over our children than we really do. We like to think we have more influence over the kinds of people they are, I think, than we really do. And I think, and we see lots of examples of this, of parents whose children will do unthinkable things. Sometimes when I'm watching the news, or you hear something, that someone has done something horrible in the world, we always we have this natural curiosity about their psychology, but I always think about their parents, and not in a judgmental way at all, but in a curious way. Like, did you know your child capable of this? Like, and if you did, when and how, and what did that look like? And what is your obligation to that child, whether they are grown or not? What is your obligation, as a parent? What do we owe our children in that circumstance? And that all kind of connects into that nature versus nurture question, right? Like, how much are you responsible for? And what do you do about that? And so that's really, I think, where a lot of these questions in the book came from, and where the character of Violet came from. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it really adds to the sort of page turning of the story, because I found myself searching for answers. Like, what's the answer? What is it? Because as a mother, I have, obviously the same questions in my mind. And you're right, you are left sort of, there really is no answer. And, but it does propel the book so forcefully. It's such a great deep dive into all of these issues. We have time, because I need to geek out a little bit more on writing. For those of you watching, if you're readers or if you're writers, the process of writing a thriller, and Alexandra, you touched on this earlier on why you wrote a thriller, and it's also why I write thrillers, because if you ever don't know where the story can go, you could just add some action, or you can just do something crazy and you're like, yay, I got through the middle of the book, the worst part to write. But what I want to know if each of you is a plotter, or, and I don't love this expression, but pantser, they call, if you write or fly by the seat of your pants, then they call you a pantser. Are you plotters or pantsers? How much plotting went in? How much revision went in? How did you choose, your narrative structure? Who is Maud Dixon is written in the same narration throughout, even though there are different parts. And Ashley, you did go back in and sort of pepper in these backstories in the points of view of these other women, which it sounds like you added later. So Alexandra, do you want to start and just tell us, what was this experience? How much plotting? How did you choose the structure? What was it like for you to write this book?
It was hard. I think I wish I were a plotter and I'm a pantser, which is a term I've never heard, but I think I'm going to adopt now. I'm very organized on my computer, and I have still 24 drafts numbered for Who is Maud Dixon. I plotted it out at the beginning. I had my plot, and then almost nothing stayed the same. As Ashley mentioned, with her character, with Blythe, I just had these voices down for Florence, well, more for Helen, but also for Florence. And in the end, that's really what drove the plot, is like having their dialogue and what situations I wanted to put the two of them in, how I wanted their like power dynamics to play out. And so really the plot ended up going from their character, although it probably would have been easier to do it the other way around. I was living in Paris when I wrote it, and our apartment got broken into, and they stole my computer, my husband's computer, so I lost a lot of drafts. So I mean, this was not a straight line from A to B. And I mean, as both people I know, when you're writing your first novel, you're learning how to write a novel as you write a novel. So I mean, you make so many mistakes, you have to throw out so much. So yeah, I would say it was pretty messy, and I wish it hadn't been. Well, maybe not, who knows,
And with the next book, will you do the same process, or did you learn things along the way that now you're like, okay, next time I am doing it this way, differently?
I just threw out my entire plot. And same thing happened. I got this voice in my head, and I was like, oh, this is who I should be writing about. And she has nothing to do with this like South American plot. So that's in the garbage. And now I'm writing a completely different novel. But I mean, it's so personal, but I think for me, it really has to come from voice.
Yeah. Ashley, what about you? What was the process like, and how many drafts, and did you plot?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, very similar in a sense that, well, I didn't. So with this book, I didn't start with The Push. I didn't start with any kind of plotting. I really just let the voice kind of go. It was exactly as Alexandra said, like the voice, just what scenario did I want that voice in? What did she need to be? Who did she need to be interacting with? What were I would compulsively take notes like on my iPhone app about like scene ideas, and none of them fit together into any sort of cohesive plot. They were just sort of this random collection of scenes for a long time. And then I got to a point where I was like, okay, this is getting messy. Like I need to figure out some kind of structure. So for me, for the push, the plot and the structure came later. And it's also something I really had to work a lot on in revisions and edits, like both before I submitted it to agents and then with my editors. Once the editors at my publishers had the book, that was the thing I probably worked on the most was that structure and plot. And so the whole time so very much a pantser, but the whole time I was like, oh my God, this would just be so much easier if I had had a plan, like, because all of the revising was like digging up the foundation, and that like things that affected the whole book. And then so the rewrites were like true big rewrites. So it took me a while, and I mean, countless drafts, like I don't even know how many, but like, I feel like I rewrote the book several times, like almost completely.
Wow.
It was a lot. Yeah. And then, so I'm working on my second book now. And this whole time I've been thinking, okay, well, like now I sort of know, like all I need is a structure and a plot, and I'm going to figure it out ahead of time. And I had the voices and I had the characters, and I thought this is going to be like, I've got this. And of course, like, I mean, I'm going through revisions now with my editors, and everything is like the structure and the plot is still not working. And I'm like, but I had that from the get-go. So I think maybe that's just always going to be my problem. Like, I think the characters come easier to me, and the plot and the structure is something I need to work at. Like that, I think that's always going to be what I'm digging up and rebuilding in revisions. I mean, maybe not always, but fingers crossed, because it's so painful. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm that great with figuring that out ahead of time. or maybe that's just the way it goes. I don't know.
And every writer is different. It's amazing. I'm a plotter. I can't, if I don't know what's happening in the chapter, I get like an anxiety attack. So every writer is different. I love hearing the different processes that writers go through to produce these like incredible works of art. Okay, so I know Kathleen wants to come back on with questions, but first I want both of you to just tell us like your best moment, like what list you hit that was like the most exciting moment, movie deals, like feel free, like tell us your most exciting, biggest news, best thing from this incredible experience, because you both hit it out of the park on your first novel. So I want readers to know what that feels like. So have at it. What's been your greatest moment so far?
Ashley, do you
I
want
put you on the spot. So
Go ahead, Alexandra. You go first.
You go first.
Okay.
Yeah, you go first.
I think my greatest moment, or maybe this was my worst moment, I don't know. I think it was greatest. I was 4 months pregnant with my second child. I was going to, the big, the 20-week ultrasound. So I guess that's whatever, 5 weeks. And my agent called. We had just gone out to editors and she had the first offer in. And something about, it all became real. And it was just, and somehow I was just like working on this as a hobby. And then I was like, oh, I'm getting paid for this. It just all of a sudden hit me. And I was just like, I had to sit down on the street. I was like so overwhelmed. I was just this like pregnant woman on the street. People were like, are you okay? And I was like, yes, I'm terrific. And I was meeting my husband and then we were both just like, I just couldn't believe it. I think that was the part that really, it started to feel real. And I started to realize, at every step, I was sort of like, I'm never going to finish this chapter. I'm never going to finish this draft. I'm never going to get an agent. I'm never going to sell. And so at that point where it was all becoming, it was like, this is going to happen. It was exciting.
That's just such a great image. I love it. Ashley, what was
great? Oh my gosh. Well, first I have to toot your horn, Alexandra, about because you had that wonderful Wall Street Journal profile, right? And it was so funny because my book had just come out and my husband doesn't really pay attention to like any of the press or whatever. Like he's not in this world. He doesn't really get it. But he loves the Wall Street Journal. And I remember him saying to me, like, I was getting it was in the New York Times and some other places and it was, Good Morning America book club. And my husband was kind of like not so fazed by it all, but he had asked me like, oh, well, what about the Wall Street Journal? Like, do you think the Wall Street Journal would ever cover it? And I was like, no, never. Like they don't cover debuts. They wouldn't be interested in this kind of book. This is not their thing. And he was like, okay. And then literally like 2 days later, he was like, hey, but what about this? This is a woman who wrote a debut and her book doesn't sound so different than yours. And it was so funny. And I was like, okay, fine. She got it. So funny. So that was a funny moment. But in terms of highlights, for me, I think like getting an agent was really like a big deal for me and felt like the most like meaningful moment in a way through this all. And I think it's because, it's such an important part of the process of this. Like it's the first step and it's the first time that like someone is, backing you and like giving you a vote of confidence, to sign with an agent. And I remember like going out to like this dream list of agents and thinking there was no way, that I was going to hear back from one of them or I get a rejection in like 3 months. And like, I just kind of sent the emails and thought, okay, now I just won't think about that for a long time. And an agent emailed this agent that I ended up signing with, Madeline Milburn, who's based in London and UK. She emailed me back within like 10 minutes. And she wrote, it was crazy. And I almost remember thinking that like it couldn't be true. And I emailed the wrong person and like something had happened. And she wrote back the most lovely response and I will never forget the feeling of reading her email back. Like just what she said about she hadn't even read the book yet, but what she said about the pitch and the voice and the sample and all of that. And I just thought, whoa, like this could be something. And then she had a dinner party or something that night with our time difference. And she emailed me like really late at night after I sent her the full manuscript. She emailed me really late at night to be like, I just wanted to leave the dinner party and go home and read the rest. And like, you have something here and this is like really something. And, we can do a lot with this. And it was such an exciting moment to have that validation, like for the very first time. And I didn't really know how to go about all of this. And of course, I'm in Toronto and she's in London. And so there's no like, meeting face to face, and nobody was Zooming then or anything, it was before. And as it happened, she was going to New York the next week, which of course is like quick hour flight from Toronto. And she had said to me, like, would you come next week for a night and meet me in New York for dinner? And I remember thinking, like, who am I to be like flying to New York for a night to like meet this like big literary agent for dinner at this fancy restaurant? Like, it all felt so ridiculous. And of course I went, and it was so fun, and we clicked right away, and I decided to work with her like during dinner, and we ordered champagne, and it was just like this wonderful, like crazy, weird moment where I just thought like, but truly it was life-changing. Like, she really changed my life, and signing with her was a life-changing moment, like, for sure. And so all of the other things that have happened since have been wonderful, and I'm so grateful for them. But there is something I will never forget about how that felt, like that first meeting with her and signing with her.
I love those moments. Those were not the moments I was expecting. I was expecting hitting the New York Times list, getting a movie deal with Paramount, but those are like those, and I get it. I had similar moments. I think every writer who has made it to publication has had similar moments, and it is we are so much in our heads, and I don't think people like understand it's not insecurity. We're not insecure people, but there's something about your work that until you get that validation from someone who's a professional, not just like your friend or your mother or something, that it's you don't realize how profoundly insecure you were about what you were producing until you get the validation, and then it's like it overflows and creates this like eruption of emotion, like, oh my God, I'm okay. It's like Sally Field at that famous, Academy Awards, like, you like me, that's like what it feels like. It's really interesting. Anyway, okay, so Kathleen, I'm so sorry I went way over, but do you want to come on and
Yep.
share
You guys
questions?
are great. I can't, you're just terrific. You should go on a vacation together. You're just so entertaining.
I'm in.
I know.
Done. Anywhere, anytime.
We'll send the case of rosé. But we do have a few questions from the audience. I'll start with some that were sent in before. We have, this is for Ashley, since you have young children, how are your young mother friends receiving this book?
Oh, that's a great question. No one's asked me that. Yeah, I think, okay. I mean, I feel like the interesting thing about this book for people is, I mean, I think it's a little polarizing in a sense that, if you're at a certain point in life, you're probably not going to love reading this book, or if you're a certain kind of person who, doesn't want to go to the darker places. And I think that's just the reality of this book, is that it's dark and it goes to some really truthful, I think, honest places, and it can be a lot. I think especially if you are, freshly postpartum or you're expecting. So I've had some friends who are just really in the thick of it right now who have said to me, like, I love you, but I'm gonna wait to read this. But I also, because I was writing this when my son was so little, like when, he was 6 months old and I started, and all through had another baby in that time. And so I have had to say to friends, like, this isn't about you, like, because there's some scenes with her and her friends, and this book is very much fiction. It is not at all based on my experience or the experience of my friends, although I think as a writer you're always pulling little bits of inspiration from your real life, and you almost can't, I can't help that, things you overhear or things someone says that just make you think about your character in a certain way. I mean, yeah, so yeah, it's a good question.
Good answer. This is for both of you. Let's see, do you think you have to understand real psychology to write a psychological thriller? And Alexandra, why don't you take that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you have to have an understanding of, like, the field of psychology. I think you just have to be like a human in the world who thinks about what it's like to be another human, and who has like a modicum of empathy, which I guess maybe not everyone does. But no, I think you just need to be curious and empathetic.
Sounds good. Ashley, did you want to add to that?
I totally agree. I think I don't have a background in psychology. It's not, I didn't do a lot of research into the psychology of my characters. It was sort of more, empathy. I think it's really, like you said, it's putting yourself in these shoes and really thinking about human reactions and human emotions and how people relate to each other, and observing the world around you, is sort of what it is for me. Yeah.
Sounds good. I'm going to pull some of these off the, all right. What is the symbolism of Blythe's husband's name?
Oh, yeah. I hope this isn't a disappointing answer, but there is none. His name is Fox, which is unusual. I don't know why. I don't really choose names with any symbolism or any meaning. I honestly just choose names that I like, that I will enjoy using as I'm writing. I don't know if Alexandra and Wendy feel the same, but there's no symbolism there. And some people had pointed out that Violet, who is quite violent, is only one letter away from that word, and I didn't, that wasn't intentional either. I didn't notice that until a reader pointed it out. But yeah, I don't know. How do you guys choose names, or do you think much about it?
I mean, I like to choose names that are a little quirky, as I'm assuming you do too with Blythe and Fox. But yeah, it's just like something clicks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Here's a question for Alexandra. Why might an author choose to use a pseudonym?
I mean, I think there are people who really have no interest in fame and scrutiny. I actually write under my maiden name, even though in my real life I go by my, I took my husband's last name. There was a part of me that just wanted a little bit of separation, and I can't even really explain why. It just, I had never done anything before that was like public and out there. I didn't want to make like my personal Instagram public with my kids on it. It just freaked me out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's just a part of me that wants like a little bit of a wall and a little bit of a space. But I couldn't really tell you. I mean, I wouldn't do like a real pseudonym. Like I'm proud of what I made, and I want people to know. I don't know.
Yeah, that's good. Ashley, what or who did you model Blythe and Fox's relationship on?
Oh, well, not my own relationship, thankfully, because that is not it. But I think a lot of Fox and Blythe's relationship is like, I really wanted to write through the day-to-day with them in a lot of ways. And there are, without giving away any spoilers, there are big things that happen in the book that impact their relationship and their dynamic as a couple, certainly. But for the first half of the book, I really wanted it to be looking at the ways a marriage or a relationship can really disintegrate in quiet ways. And I think that that's really what their relationship, what I wanted to show with their relationship. I wanted to show that real weight of parenthood on a marriage that is inescapable, I think, and how that changes both people as individuals, but then changes the relationship. And yeah, I think a lot of that is just again, from sort of thinking through what that would be like. And certainly, although their relationship's not based on my own relationship, I mean, I was definitely going through our first two little children and my own relationship, and there are little things that you observe or witness in life that you almost can't help but explore more through fiction, although we're very different. But yeah, I really had I really loved writing their relationship, although obviously it does not end well. But yeah, I really enjoyed the dynamic of them and figuring them out together as a couple.
There's a question for both of you. It says, what is the biggest lesson you learned from writing your first book that you hope to apply to writing your next one? When we start with Alexandra.
I think I learned that you're going to hate it a lot of the time, and that is normal. In this case, it was very helpful to be married to a seasoned novelist, because I would say to him, like, this is terrible, like this is truly terrible, and he'd be like, yeah, okay, like, oh, keep on. Like every single writer feels like their book is terrible at some point. And so I'm having these days now with book 2, and I just think, like, just keep trudging forward. And the one thing I did actually with my first book was I tried not to, for at least the first chunk of it, read over anything I had written, because I would just like turn so critical. And so I just, I try not to reread a lot. And my first draft is just like a mess, typos everywhere. And I'm just like barreling forward.
And Ashley, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think now I know like how much value you get out of heavy revision and heavy rewrite, and I think that instead of it's still daunting, and it's still like, you know, gives you that oh my god feeling when you go into it, but I think now I know how much better revisions make your book. And so I believe a little more in that process now, and so I'm more willing to kind of really dig it up and rewrite it, if you know, or rewrite significant parts of it. So that's what I'm trying to remind myself now.
We have a question for both of you. What are you both working on now? Alexandra, do you want to start?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I just switched. I just threw out the draft of my book, and I've started something new. I actually wasn't even sure I wanted to write another thriller. And now I'm just like really leaning into it. It's not totally a thriller, but it's a bit more of like a detective novel. I'm just sort of leaning into the genre. And yeah, I'm having fun with it so far.
Good. And Ashley?
Yeah, so I'm working on, you know, the book I'm working on now explores a lot of the same themes, although I think similar to Alexandra, it feels a little different. It's not so thriller, but maybe more emotional suspense direction, I would say. And yeah, it's also about marriage and motherhood, and I think I'll always want to explore those themes to some extent, although it looks at the lives of four different women as opposed to the one character. It's four different points of view, a little later in life than Blythe was. I wanted to sort of explore that time in life, like, you know, late 30s, early 40s, when it sort of feels sometimes as women like you've, you know, made all the decisions you're going to make. You know, you have the career you have the relationship you have, the children you have, the socioeconomic status you have. And I wanted to look at, you know, different women in that scenario and how you respond or not, kind of to that. So it's been fun. It's been fun to write. As Sam, I'm having fun with it. And I mean, hard to work on during this past year of a pandemic. I'm sure Alexandra's felt that as well, and Wendy too. Just writing is tough right now, but it's also been nice to have something to focus on. So
here's one for Alexandra. How did you pick Morocco as a setting?
In that case, I was really taking my cue from Highsmith, who had these wonderful far-flung locales. I was thinking about Tangier for a while, and I also wanted to pick some place that would be fun to go research, which it was. And you know, it's just, you're going there every day in your head, and I really wanted to spend it someplace pleasant. That sounds sort of like twee or something, but it's true. I didn't want to just be like, I don't know. It was fun spending the day in Morocco and then, you know, returning to my life.
Sounds fun. Here's a little bit of a longer one. This is for Ashley. Was there a double meaning in your title? I kept thinking of the fact that women have to push their babies into the world, and that the push referred to the moment of birth, and the fact that there was this family of women who were so disconnected from their daughters.
Yeah, yes, it does, I think, have several meanings. And I had a hard time coming up with a title for this book. And it sort of was one of those moments where like the creative fairies just kind of like randomly one day when I was doing housework, just like put the idea in my head when I wasn't trying to think of it or brainstorm it. And it just randomly came to me one day, and I thought, oh, that is the title. It's the perfect title. And I think it does work on the levels that this person has suggested, you know, the push of labor. There is, of course, the physical push in the book. There's an event with a push in the book, separate from labor. And also, I think referring to just that pushing through of, you know, the extremely hard days of motherhood. And, you know, there really is no choice but to do that, you know, on the darkest days, on the hardest days, and the most challenging times. You know, I think for everybody, but also for these characters, you know, you have to sort of do that. You have to just push through. And actually, since the book's been out, I've heard from readers who have had other interpretations of the push as it relates to the book that I had never thought of, that are very, very accurate and very smart as well. You know, the idea of being pushed to have a child, which all three women in this book were, which I had never thought of. And yeah, several other meanings too. So yeah.
Well, I think we have one more question. I guess all three of you could answer it. Would you like to write the script for any of your books? I guess when they go into.
Yeah, I have never asked to do that, and I have written screenplays, but I think having had, I think all of my books optioned at one point, I think 4 of them still are in option. They're all in some sort of process, but there is something in Hollywood that when you write your own script and you're not a seasoned screenwriter, they're taking a risk on you, and it's incredible all the pieces that have to come together to make these things go from an option to actually getting made. And I have a very wise agent who's very open to, you know, all of these ideas, but I read between the lines that if we can get a seasoned writer attached, that will help get talent, that will help get a director, and it's just people, it's a whole other world. But I have great respect for the authors who just want to do it and become showrunners. Megan Abbott did it with one of hers, and I have great respect for them, because they really are sort of taking that on and doing it. And once they do it, then they're seasoned and then they're in. So that's been my sort of interpretation of it. And I haven't taken that leap. I've also been busy, you know, with kids and writing. So it seems like a big leap. And also, if you show run, you really need to be in LA. That's the other thing. If it's not a film where it's just a script, but it's going to be a show, you, like Caroline Kepnes with You, she is in LA. She's there, you know, well, now not there every day, but she was there like every day in the writer's room. So if it's a show, a limited series, it involves actually physically being in LA or being, you know, somehow present with these writers all the time as they are writing and brainstorming. So I don't know, Alexandra, have you had any?
Yeah, I mean, I feel a similar way. There was a small part of me that thought, oh, like, let's give it a try. And then, like, you know, the more logical part of me said, don't you dare. I think part of what I really like about writing novels is, to some extent, there's no pressure. It's just you working at your own pace. There's nothing writing on it. You're not employing anybody. And I don't think I could work well with that type of pressure where there's like a budget and a timetable and all these different stakeholders. And I recently read a draft of the script for Maud Dixon, and I just was reading and thinking, like, I couldn't have done this. I really couldn't have. Yeah. And part of it was, I think the screenwriter was just very flexible. Like, she had to do a lot to compress the plot, and she changed some things, which I thought she did really well. But I just don't think it would have occurred to me. I mean, I think it's just a talent maybe I don't have. Maybe one day I'll get there, but right now, no.
And what about you, Ashley?
Yeah, I totally agree with both of what Wendy and Alexandra said. I also had like oh, that would be interesting, and then realized no, you absolutely can't do that. They're not, you know, it's not something I could take on right now or would have any idea how to do. I was excited about the idea of somebody else taking it and making it theirs, like somebody who really knows what they're doing. So mine's option for a limited series, and there is a screenwriter attached to it. Yeah, they haven't announced it yet, but I feel like I'm so happy that person is doing this and not me. So I think, yeah, I'm really excited to just read the script and watch it all happen and just learn from that perspective. Will be cool enough for me, I think, right now.
Great. Yeah. You three have been so delightful. We can't thank you enough for spending your time with us. I want to remind everyone Barrett Bookstore has all these books, and if you're looking for page turners, these are the books to pick up because you'll be up well into the night. So thank you for spending your evening with us. And we can't wait to hear and read about your next book. So I'll say good night. And once again, thanks for all your help and time tonight. Night, ladies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Bye.